Welcome everyone. My name's Sue Elson and welcome to How to Write Your Own Book. The main guest for today is Daniel Bernard. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. This is the first time we've ever spoken to each other, so that's kind of exciting. And we've also got Dave Stokes, who's also on the screen there. He's an audiobook producer. So it's going to be a fairly casual and informal discussion. So just to give you a tiny little bit of background, Daniel reached out to me because I'd put a post up online and he'd connected, and then he mentioned he wants to write a book. And I said, well, rather than me just answering the questions to you, why don't I answer the questions to everybody so that everybody at the same time can learn a little bit about this. So what I thought I'd do just briefly, I've got some slides, we can go through those. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. And what we'll do is we'll just have the conversation, for want of a better word, so that we can actually reveal all these tips and tricks along the way. So firstly, in 2016, I wrote 3 80,000-word books. And basically what had happened is when I was 28 and pregnant and working, I lost my job because, I was pregnant. And then after and not by my choosing, by the way, not because I left, but because I was actually, let go. I realized afterwards that I was back in demand. So I thought, this is crazy. A breastfeeding woman, I'm in demand. And then, maybe when I'm 40, I won't be having opportunities. So what I actually decided was that I needed to keep myself constantly learning and planning for my future. So in my 50th year, I actually decided that, and we've still got some little bit of background noise here, so I might just mute Daniel as well. So what I decided was that, well, I need to make sure that when I stop running and doing LinkedIn things, that I'll still have a career. So I decided that the thing to be was an author. And my goal is to write 10 books and then I'll classify myself as an author. So the journey to being, for want of a better word, a full-time author is a little way off for me, but it's definitely on the cards. Now, interestingly, lots of different things have happened since then, but this is about how to really get the first book done. And so what I would love you to do in the chat is, have you written a book? Are you planning to write a book? Like, where are you on this stage? Because we can tailor today's discussion around some of your concerns. You can mention where you've come from, what you would like to get out of it. Just pop them in the chat. We'll keep a really, really close eye on that. So for me, I'm the sort of person, and by the way, this is not professional advice. This is just stories and insights and anecdotes and experience sharing, all that sort of thing. I decided that the best way for me to write a book was to set a book launch date. That was the only way I was going to finish it on time. So I set 3 book launch dates. So regardless of what happened, I had to have the book finished by then. So that gave me a deadline. And that's really the only way I work. Some people, prefer to sort of set up a routine where they're doing X number of minutes a day. I wasn't that kind of person. And I came up with the titles of those 3 books and separating the content out into those 3 categories. And I thought I'd start with the easiest one first, which is the LinkedIn one, because that was the one I knew the most about. But I also wanted to make sure that I didn't talk about anything in any book that was already in one of the other books. So I didn't want to repeat anything that I said. So obviously with LinkedIn, so long as I was talking about LinkedIn, that was fairly easy. But for the second 2 books, 120 Ways to Attract the Right Career or Business and 120 Ways to Market Your Business Hyperlocally, there were some crossovers. So I had to work out what would go in the second book and what would go in the third book. Now, the LinkedIn book is very much a strategic book, and the second book is much more story-driven, and the third book is also much more case study based. So they all had different themes, but the way for me to write is to grab all my ideas, however they come. So I put each individual idea on a post-it note, and then I would actually sort them into chapters, and that's how I did it. So, and then it was just a case of getting the writing done. Now, I'll show you a quick video And it goes through where I was very fortunate to find, it's an Airbnb property, which is in Clifton Springs near Geelong, which is in regional Victoria. And it was on the top of a cliff overlooking a bay with the mountains in the distance. Like, you can't get a better view than this, in my view, for writing a book. And so I used to go down there for a week at a time, and it would take me 3 days to detox from my life and not be running around at the crazy pace I usually run at. And then I would have the opportunity to do the deep work. And to keep myself on track, I actually wrote down how many words I was doing per day. And I got up to 12,000 words in one day. So that was probably the best out of any of the days, but that just kept me focused. But whilst I was writing, if I felt like asleep, I'd stop and I'd go and have a sleep. And then if I felt like something to eat, I had something to eat. And I just really made it all about the writing and my physical health. And that gave me the opportunity to really concentrate. But without that framework of the Post-it notes, the chapter guidelines, I really couldn't do it. Now, obviously, as it got closer to the launch date, it became much more challenging because I was running out of time and I didn't feel like I'd finished and I couldn't do the index. And I did try and get somebody to edit my work. And what I found was that every time somebody looked at it, they changed my voice, the sound of the way I write, which is very distinct. So anybody who's read my books will know that I present in a certain way, I sound a certain way, I use words in a certain way, and they can hear my voice when they read my books. In fact, they actually say it. It's like I can hear you speaking, Sue, when you do this. And this is why having Dave on is so important too, because he's got the audiobook. And that's the way I write. You know, I write the way I speak because I'm an educator. I want people to learn. But the interesting thing is, after having published those and doing a whole bunch of things that didn't make money and not selling them, and, you know, I'll get to all of that stuff later. I've now moved on to writing poetry. And during COVID, I met a person who was facing some fairly serious medical tests and was very concerned about it. And this particular person I met on a dating website, and I couldn't see him. So I decided to write a story to him in the morning and in the evening. And it turned out to be erotic fiction, which is something very different to nonfiction. And in the morning, it gave him something to ponder over for the day. So made him really think about, you know, what does life mean? That was in the scenario of the fiction. And then in the evening, it was sex, different types of sex with all sorts of variations, not necessarily things I would do, but definitely erotic. And I came up with this really brilliant idea because it was kind of a story of him in, you know, not reality, but he had all these different lovers and he had different experiences. But there was this one woman he met, and the first time he met her, she was wearing blue. So the story is called The Woman in Blue. And this woman in blue introduced him to things about himself. And in the end, what happened was the woman in blue told him she wasn't real. She was only in his imagination. So in other words, the woman in blue was this creation of everything he either, you know, wanted to have in the perfect relationship. And he said he got a lot out of it. He went to his medical tests and he got the all clear. So who knows whether it was healing? Who knows whether it was just a fun read? But I tell you what, I wrote 50,000 words in 2 weeks. And I was quite traumatized by the end of it because it was very, very intense. Has to be an audio. Oh, sex in a car? Not sure how that's going to sound on audio. Depends on the suspension. But yeah, it was a challenging experience, to say the least. Suffice to say, he doesn't want me to publish it because it was very much tailored for him. But that was my first ever experience of writing fiction. And in 2016, when I wrote my books, I actually heard a terrific conversation on, a Spotify ad for Victoria University, which basically was a poem. Courage beats comfort, this beats that, something else beats this. And I contacted the university and I asked them if I could use it in the front of my book, which was basically a poem. So then what happened was I had to have a poem for every book. So my fourth book, Gingsters, has a poem in every chapter. My fifth book, LinkedIn for Me and My Career or Business, was actually, the digital version is out there, but the printed one isn't, because I keep wanting to add content to it because so many things change. So that's a bit of a drama, but hopefully this year it will finally end up in print. But my next two books after that one are poems for lovers to read to each other and poems for me to truly be, because I believe that we talk to children and read them books, but we don't talk to one another because of our devices. And so these books are designed, if you do have a lover, to talk to them, and they're all gender neutral. It can be two men, two women, man and a female, or anything in between, but not threesomes, just twosomes. And the idea is, you know, you read the poems out to that person. But the poems for me to truly be is, even if you're in a relationship, you still need to have, you know, look after yourself, be independent. So that's the short version of a very long story. So we'll start there. I'll have a quick look at the chat. And whilst I'm doing that, Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself and explain what you would like to get out of today? And then I'll hand over to Dave.
Sure. Well, so I'm Daniel. I answered the poll on LinkedIn, and this is how we've all come to meet here. So this is kind of fantastic. Yeah, so I suppose I'm at the beginning of perpetually at the beginning of a journey of assembling ideas together in my head. And so I suppose I had a series of questions about, you know, how other people have navigated said journey,
It is, yeah.
and you know, the whether it be the compilation of the ideas, distilling of them, editing them, making them comprehensible by more people than just yourself, you know, things like that. Yeah, and then, you know, sifting through, basically it's like what's in some sense the 80-20 of of deciding what's good enough.
Yes.
And then when to just go with it and move along, rather than being like, well, it's not quite right. No. And then, you know, and then what parts of it to then say, no, actually this part needs to be quite right. And then again, you know, the questions on, does it actually need to be a book, or does it need to be, you know, a graphic? Does it need to be a presentation, a webinar, a conversation, a lecture, you know, I don't know, a discussion, a group thing. So there's all sorts of different mediums for discovering truth, right? And so, you know, that's sort of where things are at.
Yeah, absolutely.
Been kind of there for a while. You know, there are things that I've written in the past that are more on the academic side. So there are things that I have written, but somehow this feels different a little bit.
It is.
I don't know exactly why. I haven't quite put my finger on as to what the differences exactly are, or whether that guides format or audio, or, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, so that's why I again, right, just sort of looking to others for their journey.
Yeah, well, I can definitely say that for me, you know, it was obviously part of that bigger journey to have a future career. But one of the outcomes that I didn't expect from the process was it sort of sorted all this stuff in my head. Because, you know, you accumulate so much knowledge, experience, ideas, and so on. And being able to convey it in such a way meant I kind of catalogued my brain, and I came away with this incredible sense of relief at the end of, you know, those 3 books, apart from probably the fact that I finished writing them. And yes, it was difficult to determine when it was finished and so on and so forth. But here in Australia, if you publish a book, you're required to send a legal deposit copy to the National Library of Australia. So regardless of what happens to me physically, there will always be a copy of my book in the National Library of Australia. And I kind of like that sense that my great-great-great-great-grandchild could find out what I said back in 2016. There's kind of something ephemeral about that. Also, a librarian once told me that paper lasts 500 years if it doesn't get wet or burnt, but digital content has to keep being republished every 50 years for it to remain accessible. So you think about a floppy disk or a USB disk, how often do we use those anymore? Or even a CD or a DVD, everything's streamed or digital or files, or, you know, who knows what the next format's going to be. So obviously something that you produced 50 years ago on a computer is difficult to be read on a computer now, depending in which format it was created. Like if it was in some word processing program that no longer exists, you know, unless it was converted to plain text. Yeah, there's lots of issues with it being there beyond our lifetime. But Dave, you've worked with a lot of authors, so let's bring you in and give us your thoughts on why people write books and where they start and what they get out of it.
Sure, Sue. Well, I suppose in all of this, I'm not really an author myself, number one. So full disclosure, number one, I'm not an author. And number two, I hate reading. I have never read for pleasure in my life. I've worked in IT for many, many years. I'm happy reading technical specifications and, you know, done a couple of degrees and all that sort of stuff. So I'm happy with all of the probably very stereotypical male nonfiction reading. I'm quite happy to do it, but I don't see any joy in coming home at night after looking at a screen all day, typing little characters, and you know, curling up with a good paperback. I've just never been drawn to it. My most embarrassing story about it probably is that one of the few books that I did read as a child was called Star Wars, and I've read through this thing and thought, wow, that's absolutely fantastic. And I'm, you know, old enough to remember when Star Wars came out, and I went out and saw the film after reading the book, and I've gone, oh my, it's just so the same. It's exactly the same picture that I had in my mind until somebody pointed out to me that the Star Wars book was actually written off the screenplay. So I just want to really set the bar as to where I am sort of intellectually and academically with literature. You know, it's not, you know, I'm not that hard to beat. But in terms of the experience of working with other authors, it's absolutely been fascinating. And I've gone everywhere from gin distilling to traumatic childbirth injury, to advice on how to work with LinkedIn, social media, dating services. So there's been this incredible raft. And of course, because I need to, as part of the audiobook process, I need to listen to the book from the very beginning to the very end, as if I was consuming it as the customer. And so I want to make sure that I'm absorbing and understanding what it is that I'm saying. And to pick up on one of your points, Sue, audiobook in your voice. I mean, sorry to segue there at an embarrassing moment for you, but a great story. I loved your story about the Woman in Blue. And erotic literature, for example, I've done 2 pieces so far, and they are lots of fun, and they're very moving to edit. And as audio, it definitely adds a different dimension and a spice that
oh my goodness, I didn't expect that to be the outcome of today's discussion. But yeah, look, it was interesting because writing it, I had to stop writing a few times because it really affected me, because I imagined all these scenarios, and I guess that's what writers do. But I did interview a number of authors many years ago when I was running events for people who are new to Melbourne, and all of the authors said you don't write a book until you've got an audience. But I guess something like they say that the most popular books are actually romantic fiction. You know, there's a lot of people who consume romantic fiction. Erotic fiction, you know, I don't know how much of it there is, but I felt like it was erotic healing, because I believe, and I could be stereotyping men terribly here, but men might not be interested in reading, War and Peace, but they might be interested in reading about sex. So I figured if they were interested in reading about sex, I might be able to weave in a message in the story that, they would absorb. And so I took this idea to somebody who runs men's groups for men who've committed domestic violence. And he turned around and said, look, a lot of these people are not well educated, unfortunately. So it probably wouldn't be the right audience for them. But there's, probably a lot of other people who would be interested in it. So, but that concept of having the audience and knowing who you're writing for, I think this would help you a lot, Daniel. If you think about, who you want to educate or who you want to inform, entertain, persuade, encourage, inspire, these are the people you need to be thinking about. So if you create this avatar, a bit like any sales thing, that says the ideal person I would help would be able to use the services I offer, then what are the things that I could provide of maximum value to that person? And when I did that poll about what would be most helpful, a book with tips or an online course with videos, events with tips, or what was the other one? One-on-one coaching, most people said the online video with a course. And so that's the trend now, obviously, because people can do it in their own time. They feel like they get more to know you because you're on the video rather than on, just words on a paper. And the good thing about videos, you can audio listen to it as well. So if you don't want to watch the screen, you can still do the audio. And you can obviously display a lot more as well. Now, definitely not putting Woman in Blue into a screenplay right yet. That's just going way too far. But interestingly, everybody I've told about Woman in Blue wants to read it. So I definitely think there's an appetite for that type of content. But I'm a raving introvert and not really willing to put my name out there as an erotic fiction writer. I might get a lot of
well, that's what ghostwriting's for, Sue, and that's what nom de plumes are for as well. Candy.
Yes, is that my new name, Candy?
Yeah.
No, I've got my porn star name. It's Sophie Sugars, but I did develop a different name. I actually created a name, but I think that it's an interesting philosophy. But I think also if people understand who, like when I read something, and believe you me, I hardly read any non-fiction, any fiction at all. In fact, practically none. I want to know the writer. Like I'm really curious about the writer when I listen to those, read those books. So
I agree with you. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, Sue. Yep. Just very briefly, just one quick extra one was that I love the way you talked about you were talking about conversational tone and also the potential risk that comes along with possibly choosing the wrong editor who doesn't hear your voice. But I think the books that translate the best from written into audio are those ones that are written in a conversational tone and very much in the style in which the author speaks. So I'm 99% of my authors record their own books in their own voice. So just something for you to have a think about. Daniel, you've got a lovely speaking voice, so I'd have no hesitation in recommending that you would do something like that. But it can inform the writing process to some degree. That's the message I got from you, Sue. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I've read books that have been highly edited and checked and verified a million times over by professional publishers, and I found spelling mistakes. Several of them. And I think, you know what, I'd rather have my own spelling mistakes in there than have some other editor's spelling mistakes in there. So after having 3 people go through the first book, I said, you know what, I don't care if it's got spelling mistakes or it sounds a little bit wrong. I'm prepared to put this out under my name. I'm quite comfortable with that. Now, one of the other things is, do you self-publish? Do you traditionally publish? Or do you do some other sort of hybrid model? Now, one of the things that I did was I spoke to an amazing Australian called Ewan Mitchell, E-U-A-N Mitchell. I'll put his details in the chat for you. He's an author advisor. So he helps you make these decisions about whether you should consider this or that or something or other else. Now, he's hot on the heels of vanity publishers. These are people who say, well, for $10,000, we can do this, this, and this, and you can have 100 books to give to your friends or sell as you wish, and so on and so forth. And you get stitched up with all sorts of deals and regulations, and you don't have the rights, and there's all sorts of problems with it. So please make sure that the publisher you go through is not a vanity publisher. That's what they're known as. And some of them are very well disguised vanity publishers, but they'll say, oh yes, your book's a brilliant idea, and for this small fee we'll help you do it. So just be aware of those. Now, a traditional publisher will make you go through some sort of process of verification before they consider you. So a lot of publishers like to know you have an audience, because why would they publish your book if there's not an audience out there for it? So I bumped into a publisher at a book event, and she was very interested in the fact that I had 20,000 followers on LinkedIn, but when I didn't have 20,000 somewhere else, she wasn't so interested in me. So it sort of all died off very quickly. But if you go through a traditional publisher, there will be rules, regulations, processes, procedures, and it generally takes a lot longer. There is no way I could have published 3 books in 8 months and written them if I'd gone through a traditional publisher, because you've got to get the cover designed, approved, and the editing and the sub-editing and the text editing, the copy editing, and there's a million things. So yeah, it's an awful lot to take into account. So it will be slower. But some would say, well, you get more street cred if you're traditionally published. And I go to a lot of online events, and one of them I went to was about poets. And they said you should never publish your own poems online, because then you can't publish them in a book. And I felt like saying, well, do I want my poems to be read, or do I want them to be published? Because let me assure you, if they were published, most people wouldn't see them. And yet now, because I have search engine optimization skills, if you Google the names of some of my poems appear on the first page of Google search results. So Daniel, if your goal is to convey your knowledge to the world, to the person who needs it right now, I would say build a highly optimized website and be active on social media, get Google reviews, and be on online directories, and voila, your content will be found. So, do you want to be found, or do you want to be published? Now, another thing I've heard for many years is a book is like a business card. So if you hand over a business card, it's just a tiny little piece of paper. But if you give a book and you drop it on the table, it's got FUD value. So you are automatically given a lot more credibility if you have a book behind your name than if you don't have a book. And if you have multiple books, so much the better. So am I featured on television and radio and so on and so forth? Well, not TV yet, multiple radio spots, multiple podcasts, multiple publications. But no, not on television. And I plan to hire a PR person at some point. But, getting your message out there. Have I made money from my books? That's the big question most people want to know. Answer would be no, not from the books. Have I earned more money since publishing my books? Absolutely. Because it's given me a lot more credibility, and a lot more people are interested in dealing with me because I have written books. And I've got that evidence there. Oh yes, I've optimized Dave's profile. Thanks for that little note in the chat there, Dave. So I am found. People can find my stuff. I give a lot of stuff away for free, but I get plenty of work. Now, another thing I did was I took my books to Careers Expos, and I went to 2 Careers Expos here in Melbourne. I spent over $6,000 on having stands and being in the brochure and all that kind of thing. And I had more books stolen than I sold. And I definitely didn't make any money. Like, it cost me $6,000. So please do not put yourself at conference shows and so on unless you're really famous and people already know about you and then want to buy it, because it just did not work for me. One thing that did work, which I do plan to resume at some point, but I'm just a bit scared of the video camera, that's another story, is for 4 weeks, I produced 4 screen recorded videos, which I put on YouTube, and then I got the transcript and I created blog posts on the 120 Ways Publishing website. And for those 4 weeks, I put out one video a week. I sold books. As soon as I stopped putting out those video posts, I stopped selling books. It was unbelievable how it happened. So writing a book is only the first step. It's like giving birth, you know, you produce the baby, you know, here's the baby. Now you've got to help the baby grow or sell the books or sell the product, whatever it is you've created. And that takes a lot more commitment. But of course, by the time you've finished the damn thing, you just want to kill it. It's a tough road. And after one of my books, I slept for about 2 weeks because I was just so exhausted after putting the book together. I think after the third one. In fact, I was interviewed on audio, and I looked at my face in the photo I took next to the microphone, and I looked terrible. I looked like I just got a hangover or something. I was just frightful. So thank goodness it was audio and not video. But yeah, so you really need to think about these things, you know, in making the decisions. So I want to just quickly monitor the chat here. And Diane would like to write a book. Melita's written lots of stuff, not put them in a book yet. So let us know if you've got an idea. No book, but whether it would fit in. Well, Marcus, really depends on some of those other objectives in your life. Never written, but would like to. Yes, Eric, I think it's on a lot of people's bucket list to write a book. So even if you only publish it for your friends, you're doing really well. Apparently most books only ever sell about 500 copies. I vaguely remember from a presentation I went to. If you sell more than 5,000 in Australia, that's actually considered a bestseller. Several stories in mind. I've written a few chapters, but I've not completely written a finished story since college. Okay, Elizabeth. A number of people I've listened to have said, start publishing yourself just as blog articles or whatever on your own website and see how they go. And because 50 Shades of Grey was considered so popular, a client of mine gave me a copy of the book and I read it and I was furious. Every chapter was different. The voice kept changing, you know, and I'm not saying I'm some good writer. I finished English in, you know, the second last year of high school, and, you know, it wasn't my favorite subject. I'm not perfect on grammar. You know, I'm in that sense, I'm not proper English. I'm just conversational English. But yeah, it was terrible. And I later found out that 50 Shades of Grey was written because this woman used to submit stories to those romance websites. Oh, hello, doggy. Nice to see Daniel's dog there. And what happened was she just compiled the most popular stories that had published, and she put them in that book. Now, I don't know whether that story is true or not, but, you know, I kept feeling the voice change all the time, and that just drove me nuts as I was reading it. Now, my daughter has since gone on and read all the books in the, you know, the series, even the version from the bloke's viewpoint rather than from the woman's viewpoint. But I refused. I just hated it so much. So if you're writing, please, you know, make an effort to make it consistent so it doesn't feel like it's chopping and changing, because for someone like me, it's just really, really irritating. The other thing is, the reason I've chosen a conversational tone is because I want people to engage with the content. I don't want it to feel like I'm telling you this and I'm telling you that. I really don't like that approach. And I think that we've all moved on from that. So reduce the number of 3-syllable words you use. You don't have to use 3-syllable words all the time. If there's a 2-syllable word that will do, use it. Make shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, make it punchy. And and get other people to read it and give you some feedback, but don't believe what they say because they don't have your same level of experience. So you can get insights from people, but don't kill off all your ideas because you spoke to someone. And in the end, I decided to stop speaking to people because I thought I was just getting too confused and going off in too many directions. It was easy just to stick with my own. Written a few years ago, now restarting, have a chat. Oh, that's beginnings of a screenplay. Hi, Alan. So screenplays are different because obviously it's more dialogue and you've got to get the different people and different scenes and so on. Now, Ewan Mitchell has written screenplays for a number of Australian productions. So I definitely recommend that you speak with him. And obviously he's in Australia, and he was about 150 Australian dollars an hour. And everything he says is valuable. So if you give him a précis of what you want to talk about, he will come prepared with the facts ready for that session. The structural post-it creative ideas. Yeah, I love post-it notes. And as I said, only one idea per post-it note, so you can shuffle them around and move them. I also stick them not on a whiteboard or a wall. I stick them on very large pieces of paper. And if I don't have a really large piece of paper, I stick them together. And the reason I do that is so that I can fold it up and take it with me when I want to go somewhere. So that's how I sort out my post-it notes. And the key process step is key pointers and traps to avoid. Well, the traps is really that vanity publishing thing. You know, you can really get, you know, bamboozled. And I've had a lot of professionals tell me I've done things the wrong way. And you know what? I don't care. I'm kind of happy just to put what I've done out there. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Never use a $5 word when a 50-cent one will suffice, Mark Twain. Yeah. Good quote. So what I might do is share my screen and just link to a video that I've done, because I had a couple of slides to flick through. So this was obviously the session we're at. There's my free book. So if you go to researchgate.net, you do not need to create an account, but you can download the first 4 of my books. But if you want to pay me for them, you can go to 120ways.com. They're only $10 each. You can follow me on social media. I'll send you these slides as well. I'm a member of lots of associations. The Australian Society of Authors is excellent because you get a profile page on their website. So that will help you be found, which is terrific. Writers Victoria have lots of webinars, and the Small Press Network has a fabulous yearly conference, and they have a special day dedicated just for authors. And they also give you discounts through publishing, self-publishing through Ingram Spark, which is a print-on-demand service. And I'm also the founder of 2 social enterprises and obviously 120 Ways Publishing. I'll ask you for feedback, what's been most helpful, and also ways you can say thank you. If you want to book a session with me on something related to this or other things, feel free to get $50 off. Now, these are the questions. So this is the video that I'd like to show you. Whoops. So we'll just see if we can, it's not going to let me copy it. Okay. We'll go back the old way. Copy it from here. So this is a little video I shot from Clifton Springs, and it shows you the setup I had for my writing.
Hey guys.
Oh, sorry, getting an ad as well. A copy of my last book, but as you can see, I'm about to do another chapter, and there's some headlines for that. What I most enjoy is this amazing view, and you will hear the wind blowing. I've actually had to close the door a little bit because it's actually really windy and it keeps blowing off the little notes on the table. But as a general rule, I try and keep it open as much as I can and breathe in the fresh sea air. And you'll see over here that I've got my guidelines for the rest of this second book, and then down on the floor there's the full chart of the third book, because there's quite a lot of information from both the second book and the third book that are similar. Over here I've got notebooks and things that I brought down to digest with, my stationery drawer, a nice hot drink, glass of water, and my mister with essential oils in it. My laptop's in the bag. I always bring a spare computer just in case something goes wrong with the one I'm on. And over here you can see I've also got my incense burning and a nice range of essential oils that I have with the mister.
So over here you can see I'm fully equipped with a nice kitchen and bring down my food supplies. And as I said, the best part is being near the sea and enjoying this beautiful breeze, gorgeous sunshine, and I just can't believe how fortunate I am to be able to write here in Clifton Springs, just past Geelong in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Bye for now. Today is the 1st of...
Yeah, so sadly I can't go back there, which is, you know, terribly traumatic. But yeah, it was a really great place to write. Now, Scrivener is a writing aid. Cameron, would you like to share your story about it? I've chosen not to. Yeah.
I found it really useful because I'm sort of digital native and would get confused with post-it notes everywhere.
Yes.
And it's good in that you still have one idea per card. On the front, you can have just a title.
Mm-hmm.
Under it, you can have a bit more detail. You can drag it around and have it in a hierarchical structure.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've flagged those parts which are going to be published, you can just publish it straight to a range of formats.
Fantastic.
Prepare it for Kindle. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's already packaged up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, you mentioned a really good point. You're a digital native, so that works for you. I mean, I've heard of people using Excel spreadsheets and moving stuff around in those. So it really depends on what works for you. But when I went to school, we did everything with paper and pen. So for me, the physical act of writing, you know, really works for me. And that spatial movement and touching things and not trying to focus on a screen, because obviously when you wear glasses, it's a slightly different experience. Well, it's been a different experience for me. I get tired, whereas I found that one. But no, there's many, many tools out there for writers. Grammarly, you know, to check your grammar. I mean, that can be a really good tool. There's another program, and I forget what it's called, but it actually formats your text so that it can be published directly. Not Scrivener, but there's other ones that allow you to do it. And even Ingram Spark, which is the print on demand, you can just basically bring a Word document in and it will put it in a book layout for you as well. So there's lots of things that have streamlined that process from copy through to production really, really well. Yeah. Page, well, I think will help me. Good, Elizabeth. Using online sticky notes or a mirror board. Mind mapping is another thing that people find useful as well. So if we go back to the list of questions, I just want to make sure that we've covered the majority of ones, and then we'll open up for some more, particularly from Daniel, because I feel like you're just listening to me rabbit on here. And these were your sort of original questions. Where to get started? Well, as I said, set a date. It's amazing how effective it is. I booked venues and all, you know. My first book launch was at a bookstore because I had a long-standing relationship with the Dimmicks bookstore in Camberwell here in Melbourne. And so that's where I ran it. And we brought in our own snacks and drinks and banners. And I had my own little audio public address microphone and speaker. I had friends videoing, friends taking photos. Yeah, it was quite a production. So Kumus for mind mapping. Thank you, Cameron. And how to get it down on paper? Well, just put everything on paper, because then you can sort it. Like if you try and work it out in your head, I find it's very difficult. The idea is to get it out of your head and then play with it. Putting the points in order. Well, if you've got that person in mind that you're writing for, so that makes it a whole lot easier. So let's say, for instance, the typical person you were looking for was somebody who was in business and really needed some help to get things in order. Like, what do they want to know? How do they want to consume that content? Do they want pictures? Do they want text? Do they want strategy? Do they want tactics? Like, you've got to answer these questions and then decide, okay, well, let's think about it. The logic would be to provide the strategy first, the tactics second, you know, whatever. Options that are out there, ghostwriters. So ghostwriters, in my view, are often used for people who are doing biographies, because these people are famous musicians or artists or business people, but they don't have the time and energy to sit down and write. So the ghostwriters ask them lots of questions and try and understand them, and then go off and write. I could never be a ghostwriter. I kind of want my name on all my writing, and I've tried to write for other people and it just doesn't work. So yeah, it wouldn't be for me. I'd feel like they wouldn't really tell my story as well as I'd like. But I'm probably, a bit on the control side of the spectrum. So it kind of wouldn't work for me. But I know of a woman who ran a dating service here in Melbourne for many years. And she had this philosophy, and she got somebody to write her book, and I read it, and it was so out of date and ancient. I don't know how old she was or how old her ghostwriter was, but it was so irrelevant. Yeah, I'm not surprised she didn't sell a whole lot of books. So you'd really want to find somebody who matches your style. And author advisors, like I said, you want to ask for advice from someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome. So if you had an idea and you went to a publisher and they said, oh no, we want you to write about this, well, that's because they think they've got an audience for that rather than what you were originally going to do. So you've got to decide, do you want to go down that path? How do you convey from your head to someone else? Well, you have to have something in writing and something in detail. It's impossible for somebody to read your mind at this point. So yeah, trying to find out a way to catalogue it is interesting. What to outsource? The formatting, like that's definitely something that you can get outsourced. And how much guidance? I found that as I couldn't cope with too much new information at once. So by having individual sessions on the pay per hour with Ewan, I only paid for what I could manage at that time. So he only focused on what I needed to know then. And then when I needed to know more, he came back, or I could ask him again. Self-publish or not? I classify myself as being independently published, which is in my mind different to self-published, because I did use an author advisor, I did have editors, I did have a cover designer, I did have other people involved in the book production process. So I classify that as independently published. And then of course there's a traditional, and there will be rules and regulations, and it will take longer, and there may be additional costs. Ewan told me at the end that it costs about $10,000 to write a book. And I thought, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? I would have really liked to have known that. But if you think about the time you spend, the people you hire, the printing costs, whatever, it does add up. And if I'd known that it was $10,000 at the beginning, I might have reconsidered it, because I had actually saved $26,000 in cash at the beginning of the year because I took so much time off work, and I paid $6,000 for that career expo and various other things. By the end of the year, all 26 grand was gone. So he's right. It cost me 26 grand. Well, 4 grand off 30, I suppose, to write those 3 books. And 3 books, well, I had the titles and it was 120 ways. And the reason I chose 120 ways, a lot of people ask me that, is it was a number I could divide into multiple variables, 4s, 3s, 2s, 6s, 10s. There was many ways I could divide 120. And I didn't want it to be 101 because I wasn't offering 101 advice. So I wanted to get people's head around the idea of 120. And ever since I was a teenager, I've been cutting up magazines and collecting tips. Like, that's my thing, right? So I've got boxes in the garage of garden tips and how to clean this tip and, all sorts of tips. And so 120 ways just seemed like a good fit for that. And then I wanted the titles, as my websites do, to highlight what, the outcome was for the person. And so yeah, everything sort of fell into place. I got my book covers designed through 99 Designs, which I would not recommend that process again. I didn't feel good about letting a whole bunch of people submit ideas that I wasn't going to pay for, because the only person who gets paid with 99 Designs is the person who wins the design. And I just really didn't feel right about that. And I thought I'd given a really good brief, and yet the designs that came back were nothing like the brief. And I was just about to delete the account because I was so angry, but I did a screenshot, and fortunately there was one there that had finally got my brief. So that's the person who got the gig. And that design I had tweaked by a graphic designer friend, not by the 99 Designs person. So they came up with the concept, but the graphic designer came up with the delivery. So that's how that worked. Yeah, Dave. I can't hear you, Matt, Dave. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, there we go. Better now. I took a slightly different tack to Daniel's question about convey from my head to someone else. And I don't know if this is relevant, but I'd love to hear both of your opinions. That one of the technique that I know a few writers have used is that in addition to the post-it note, so nothing to substitute the initial thinking, probably the arrangement of your thoughts into a set of topics and then reordering those and keeping your audience in mind when you're thinking about the order of in which you want to present the information. But I know a few authors who, at the point where they've decided on a topic and they're about to put pen to paper and it seems to be a real writer's block point. You know, I've got this really nicely crafted topic, and now, you know, is it once upon a time? It was, you know, way back when in Geelong in 1965 when I was looking out at the sea, and they just get really stuck at that point. But as a possible remedy to that, people will just turn on the voice memos recorder on their iPhone and just look at the topic and just go blah, 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 and just talk about everything that they think, not necessarily in the right order, but just putting everything down that they can think about that particular topic, and then resting it for a while and then coming back to it and getting used to that. I'm hearing my own voice kind of stuff, which is a bit weird for everybody. But then you can actually listen to yourself and you can start plucking the eyes out of what you've got. And then you've probably got something which is a bit more taken down as notes. And then as you pad it out together again, you can then record it back into the phone. And then you can actually hear yourself back telling your own story. Just as not, and this doesn't end up in an audio book. It's very much kind of an editing part of the process. But I was just wondering how you guys felt about that approach, or whether, Sue, you've tried it, or it's something that...
Yeah, it's actually something I've recommended to my one of my clients. She's Italian by birth, so English is her second language, and she has terrible trouble typing because I think she might be slightly dyslexic as well. And we battle tested a variety of tools to convert voice to text, and you're spot on. The phone is the best. The phone is designed to understand the sound of a voice much better than a computer or drag and dictate or one of those things. So long as you speak clearly, as in you don't rush and talk, so all the words run together, you know, like, and have a really strong accent, that's no good. But if you just speak a little bit slower, the voice to text can work really, really well. And quite often you're not consumed with the process of writing, because you're just speaking, it comes out a bit quicker as well, because even by the time I type it, and I can type all fingers, it's slower than if I just spoke it.
Interesting.
So I think if you think fast, Daniel, like voice to text is a really great idea. What you could also do is you could email that voice to text or the text file to yourself, print it out, cut them up, and then do your post-it note version thereof as well, so that you didn't have to redo it. I also find that if you get someone to ask you questions or to read it, they'll come up with questions that you can also answer around that topic. So if there's someone you trust, you could definitely do that as an adjunct to it, but you need to have something to start with. Cameron's asked, I've missed it, but what about using something like Ex Libris where the cost is fixed and they do everything like cover design editing? Just read the rules, like, do they have copyright? Can you export it into some other program if you need to at a later date? Yeah. I'd probably recommend the same. Websites is publishing, books are publishing. It's all publishing, right? We think it's different. Websites are different, but they're just publishing. And the principle I use, it's better to have a book, no matter how you produced it, than no book, you know, if you want to have a book. So even if you do go through a vanity publisher and you stuff it up and you have the wrong editor and it was a terrible ghostwriter and all those terrible things happen, you still got a book and it's somewhere to start. And a lot of authors, you know, it takes 20 years to become an overnight success. There are some people who've written one book and it's been amazingly successful, but for a lot of authors, it's because they've put out a number of books. And there is an expression amongst author circles, the back catalogue sells the front, or the front catalogue sells the back catalogue. So once you get to the point where people love your books, then I say, what else has Daniel written? And then they'll go back and see your original books, and they won't care if it's got, boo-boos and wasn't as fabulous as, what you do by the 3rd or 5th or 10th book. They just say, oh, well, yeah, that's what it was.
Podcasts work the same way, so.
Yeah, and video, I hear.
Yep. We all want the backstory.
Yeah. What is the optimal time between books to maximize sales over time? Well, I guess it depends on your marketing plan and, how the lead time. I know that for most publishers, they give you about a 3-month plan. So, you won't be in the newspaper till 3 months after the book's actually been printed, like kind of thing, so it's quite a long process. So I guess it depends on how often you write them. And obviously I'm still, showcasing my books well after publication date. I assume that in 12 months it's sort of old news. So, my plan was to write 10 books in 5 years. So that didn't happen. I got through 5 books mostly. But if you set some sort of goal, then that's obviously going to help. And it also depends if they're all different genres, Cameron. So my poems are completely different to my nonfiction. So in theory, it's a different audience. But if people like you, they might be interested in anything you write. I don't know. I wouldn't be the best person to ask on that, but ask around, start attending events and getting clues. Daniel, what have I missed in the discussion?
Looking for the unmute button here.
Right, all good.
It moves because with the screen share, the mute button just goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I guess some of if I step back a little bit on how did you decide it was supposed to be a book?
Because I wanted to have a career that would be, beyond my training days, beyond everything else that I do. Yeah. So, and, that lifetime value as well. Yeah.
And what other formats did you consider for what you were doing?
Well, obviously a digital book. So the idea being that a digital book can go further, and is cheaper to produce and more environmentally friendly and all that kind of thing. But also because of those other things I'd heard about being considered to be more credible if you'd had a book, if you're in business, the FUD value of a book, there were lots of other things. And I also thought there's lots of stuff in my head, and wouldn't it be nice to kind of sort it? I think that it was an unexpected outcome, but I think back now it was a really great way to distill the knowledge that I'd acquired.
So speaking of unexpected outcomes, what if you had 3 unexpected outcomes, what were those?
I enjoyed it way more than I expected in the end, even though it wasn't easy. What else? Unexpected outcome. When my children and I went to collect the first box of books, I can't tell you how excited I was. Like, it was just really, really exciting. And the other interesting thing is, at my 4th book launch, I might just get you to mute because it's echoing for some reason.
Sure.
At my 4th book launch, I had somebody organised to be the MC. It was at the Wheeler Centre in Melbourne, which is a very prestigious location for writers. It was funded by the Wheelers, who produced the Lonely Planet guidebooks, and they set up this writers' centre in Melbourne with, the money they'd made from the Lonely Planet guidebooks. And so anyway, it cost me a fortune to host an event there because I was just, a random coming in. I'm not an established writer. And I had a speaker lined up, and then that speaker called in sick. So I'd written out a script for the speaker. So I went through it with my son before we were about to go live, like literally. And he at the time was 21, I think. and I'd already planned it. I was writing the questions to be interviewed by my daughter in the chair, like she was the interviewer. So she was always going to be the interviewer because she's done acting and drama, and, you know, I thought, yeah, she'll play the part. So she was already lined up to do that. But then my son was the MC. And most of the people in the audience just saw them as young people. They didn't know them as my children. And then when I mentioned, you know, well into the interview that they were my children, there was this collective sound in the audience, oh, you know, and it was like, oh my goodness, like, yeah, they didn't even realize it was my children. And see, the problem as a woman in business is we're not taken seriously, really. You know, it's a lot easier for a man to be taken seriously. And to be a woman with children and to have her children taken seriously, that was like, oh, wow. You know, I was really, really excited by that. And then at the end of the book launch, oh, tearing up even thinking about it, this woman who I'd known for many years got up and stood up and said, you know, how proud she was of my work. And this was just somebody I'd met through business. And to have somebody say that at a book launch was unbelievable, because so many people do things that are never recognised. And for her to do that unsolicited really meant a lot to me. And yeah, I was really, really grateful. And if I hadn't launched a book, that would never have happened. So yeah, there was just some sort of recognition, I guess, publicly of my knowledge and experience. So yeah, that was really cool.
So if you were to start all over again, it would be worth it for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, but also because, you know, some people have written to me and said that they got a lot out of the book, or that it changed their life, or they heard my voice, or, you know, they've said different things to me, and that's been really interesting. And my book is really designed, my first book, the LinkedIn book, was really designed for somebody to sit there, read something, type, read something, type. And there's a few people from Germany who, you know, followed that procedure to the letter. And I thought, oh, maybe I'm German in a past life. You know, like, it was just this really stereotypical image we have of a engineer doing something. And I know, you know, that's sort of a little bit of your background. And I was so excited that somebody had done that, because there's a huge amount of content in my books, huge, way more than the average person would put in a book. So to hear that somebody literally did that, that was kind of cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, that so, and then so you mentioned in passing here that it's way more than someone would put in a book. Is that related to the 120 ways idea?
Yeah. Well, yes, because I wrote 120 ways and I summarized them in the back of the book. But if you actually read each section, you can see there's more than one way in each section. So yeah, it's well over 120. And it's also 80,000 words. So it's a lot of words. Thanks, Elizabeth. Alan's got to go. Yeah, there's a few people have to go, but yeah, you're welcome to stay if you can. And yeah, so there was a lot of content. And every time I came up with an idea, I ended up coming up with lots of more ideas. I've always been really good at brainstorming. So it was really hard to sort of, if I didn't have that deadline, I would have just kept writing. And so that was the benefit of having that.
What did you do with the deadline?
I had to work backwards. So for instance, I had to have the copy at the printers by a certain date. So no matter what happened, they had to have the file. Now, it got to the point where I didn't have the file. So I rang the printers and said, can I pick the books up at the factory? You're not supposed to do this. And I said, well, I've got a book launch, I've got to do it. And they allowed me. And then I had to ask them again for the second lot. They said, Sue, you really can't do this. So by the third one, I got myself together and I was a bit better organized. But I just reverse engineered it, and I thought, right, well, if it's got to be there by this time, no matter what happens, I can't do any more edits. It's been, it's done, that's it. Yeah.
Mm. And have you thought, I guess it goes back to the format idea. Oh, you mentioned format as an outsourcing thing. What happens with formatting that it motivates you to say that this is outsourcing is the best way to do that?
Because it interferes with my writing process. So for instance, I have to have Adobe Creative Suite Illustrator, to compile my book, although there's other systems now you can use, but that's what I was using. And I hated the program. It was a dog, I couldn't just easily edit and move things around and whatever. So if I could just stick to the writing and, produce a Word document and let somebody else format it, to me, that was definitely worth outsourcing.
And what would you consider then not outsourcing at all?
The word concept is what's coming to my mind. Like you can't let somebody else decide what it's going to be about. You've got to make that decision. You've got to decide and, live or die, that's your choice. And it's not the end of the world if it's the wrong one. You can always write another one and put the better version or the different version in the second one. It's not the end of the world. So just make a decision, really. I'm sure there's lots of tools that can help you make a decision. But if you think about your audience, the main messages and your timeline, they're probably the three main things you need to think of, and just stick with that. Or they would be for me. I mean, for other people, it could be a different process. And I ran another webinar this morning and the person said, I like your logic, Sue. Like I did maths 1, maths 2, physics. Well, you call it maths there? Math, you call it, don't you? Yeah, we call it mathematics or maths. So I did 2 maths subjects, French, chemistry, and physics in my last year of secondary school. So I've got the sort of the science, rational, logical brain. So for me, it had to be kind of done that way. But for somebody else, with perhaps more feminine traits, who's more creative and, weaves their magic and allows the flow and all that kind of stuff, it could be a very different process for them. So I wouldn't want you to say, look, it's got to be done Sue's way. I think there's many different ways to do it. Yeah. And
then on audience, you mentioned the idea of writing for your audience, knowing who that is. What's the difference between the audience that you were writing to and the audience that you currently have?
That's hard to quantify. Oh, sorry, Cameron, I was using InDesign, not Illustrator. To be fair, because I use the internet as an attraction tool, I don't think the very specific niche of target audience was who I wrote it for. I think if I'm really honest, and you've grilled me a couple of times on this question, I wrote it for myself. If I think about it, like it's a version of me thinking, what would I want to teach me if I really think about it? Like, yeah, no, good question, good thought processes. I think I did write it for me, but a lot of my clients are like me. I have to say that as well. And if you think about trying to find an audience, as a general rule, they're 10 years older or younger than you. That's a very rough, basic rule, but it kind of works because you understand the people a bit younger than you and you understand the people a bit older than you. But somebody who's 20 or 30 years younger, it's kind of hard to know where they're at if it's a business topic, or their experience or the language they may be familiar with. And I wanted to make my language as accessible as possible to people of all backgrounds. So yeah, back to Dave's point, it's very conversational.
That's a really great point, Sue. And if I may weigh in a little bit, it's probably a bit of a segue, but I attended a discussion last night about funding book projects, how people are going about funding. And I know this. Sorry, Daniel, this isn't one of your direct questions, but it just reminded me of it particularly when you asked that incredibly incisive question to Sue, and I'm glad you asked her and not me. Is that it made me think about this situation that we often think, I think in it, and again, probably plays more to Sue's, forgive me, Sue, but type A thinking about this is that you have an idea, you think about how to put it together, you break it down into the bits and pieces, arrange your process and go through and do it. Now that's very rudimentary, and that's, a terribly oversimplified idea of what you've actually done on 5 occasions now. But there's another argument that says, and this came out during the crowdfunding discussion, there's another one that says, develop your idea in public. Set up a crowdfunding campaign, or maybe first set up a website where you're saying, hey, I've got this idea about writing a book. Not really sure what to talk about. I've got expertise in that. I've got experience in this. What do you guys think? And gradually build up this idea, where your audience actually instruct you, or you distill a certain pocket of that audience, go, yeah, that's where I want to go. And then you gradually develop that into a crowdfunding campaign, and you know what people want you to do. And those people will more likely chip in 10 or 20 bucks to see you get that, to finance that project, to make sure you see it through so that they can get the book that they want to read. So it's just a topsy-turvy thing to consider, Daniel, where rather than, distilling right down to the specifics and the plan, we actually go, there's no plan. We'll just wait to see what people are just, want to read. We'll just do it it's almost by consensus in a way. And then you've got your whole project funded, and you start the project with $15,000 in the bank and go, right. And then you'll be able to go and,
pay for
go
the
to that,
outsource.
go to where was it again in Geelong, Sue, where you were at the beautiful point?
Clifton Springs, yeah.
You'll have the money for the Airbnb to do the writing for 3 months. So I don't know, just a yeah. Anyway, I loved your lateral thought, and that's taking it off in another lateral direction. No, Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a book somewhere on this shelf that I actually did that. I participated in a crowdfunding for another author that was writing this really interesting kind of cartoony business book, and they put it on Kickstarter, and they're like, hey, what do you guys think of this? And here's a bunch of scribbles of my notes and from when I went to school, and somebody said it would be a good idea to put this and actually put it together in a thing. If you guys want it, throw money at it. And then so enough people wanted it, and then he made it. And I wonder if I can find it. It's here, I promise. It's somewhere here. I have a lot of shelves. This goes pretty deep. Well, if I find it, I'll show you. It's funny. It's quite funny. It's a little tiny book. But that's what he did. Yeah, in my case, I have a lot of ideas that I more so have a map for. So it's something like a massive outline that keeps breaking into tiny little pieces, and then it's, the map is pretty stable, but what ends up happening is it's so large that then even if I throw massive amounts of content at it, which is what I've been doing over the past couple of years, it just swallows it. And then it, you know what I mean? So it's so big that, I mean, I suppose my timeline is something like, I'd like to get this done in 15 years, and I'm 2 in. So it seems, and I started to sort of back calculate, what it would be like if I could get it done in 15 years, and it's still pretty optimistic. So yeah. So 50, that's the goal.
It's an interesting concept, because I think a lot of writers will tell you it's easier to write 1,000 words than 100 words, like trying to distill something down. It can be really tricky. But one of the things you have reminded me of is I always imagine my clients reading the books. you know, and because I answer a lot of questions that my clients ask in the books. So yeah, from that sense, it was for my clients. And so if you go back and think, what are the top 50 questions your clients all ask? And you start with that as the layout for the book. I think, yeah, that could be a really good starting point.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing something like that, because that seems a lot more manageable than what I'm trying to do. And that would be, you know, a small subsection, and then so tell me what you think of this idea. So I'll lay that out. I had an idea that maybe instead of trying to tackle the entire elephant, that something like taking a small section, which I think might, I mean, this is there's a reference to Star Wars earlier. I think, Dave, you were talking about Star Wars, right? That George Lucas in Star Wars decided to start in episode 4 because 1, 2, and 3 would have been way too much build up to get to the climax of the story, and he's like, I'll split it in 2. I'll do 1, 2, 3. Figure that out later. We'll start at the punchline and then go from there, make some money on that, and then do the other films. So that's my understanding of how the whole Star Wars saga happened. And so I make that parallel, thinking that maybe there's I'm assuming, speculating, I don't know, guessing is probably a better word, that there is a small portion of the gigantic elephant that's in my head that I think might have some more utility for at least an initial small subset, and then I could practice the process of getting something out the door. That would take, you know, a couple months, you know, to get that out, and at least to practice the system, I suppose, of how this works before trying to tackle this monstrosity. So yeah. Are there any parts of the process that are particularly unpredictable, or that you know, if you were to go back and say, well, my predictive capability of at this particular point earlier on the process was horrible for like step 6. What's step 6?
Well, it was actually
like top 2. I don't know.
it was much later. It was a really basic thing, and it was completing the index. Like, that was just so time consuming. Like, it was really, really time consuming and really, really annoying. And then the other thing was, I felt there were certain areas where I had not much to write about, and other sections had a lot to write about. So there might be one chapter which was 1.5 pages, and another chapter would be 10 pages, and sort of trying to, you know, make it fit over there and put that bit in over there. You know, that was kind of a tricky process as well. But to be honest, the only way you resolve any of these issues is if you actually start doing it. You know, like, it's the only way. You can intellectualize until the cows come home, but it's not going to solve any problems. So I think your suggestion about getting something out, even if it's just a 10-pager, you know, a little blurb that you can download off your website as a little précis of how you operate and your top 10 insights into business or whatever it is, that's a great way to start.
Yeah, it's okay. So something like that I have done. I've done things like that, blog articles, you know, curricula type things for academia, lectures, online, you know, webinar type things. I've done all of that. And it's so interesting that you say that the index was challenging. The way that I've been approaching this is I've started in some sense with the index, because I have a structure in my head, and sort of the map of that structure is a massive index. It has something like 200 chapters with 4 parts in each of them. And then so the map's been pretty stable. It's just a matter of getting the labels correct on all of it, because they're all related to each other in some sense. So Yeah, that's been tough. I feel like once I have the index correct, that the writing would actually be easier.
It is.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
so
I agree. And I think the other thing is, if things are staying the same, you can pretty much assume they are your values. And everything else is just the voices of probably a million others. So if you can stay with, what are my main values, and does this comply or not comply with my values, it can be really easy to sort of determine what stays in. Okay, so the analogy I use is, when I was a child, I was sent out to the backyard because my mother had done the housework and didn't want me back in the house, right? So I'm out there with my siblings and we've got the backyard. That's what we have to work with. That's it. So we managed to entertain ourselves all day just in the backyard. But now you don't just have a backyard. You have an iPad, a phone, a television, all these other things that you can use. So how on earth do you pick which one will keep you entertained for the next period of time? Because there's no limit. There's millions of choices. So if I said I'm going to put a fence around you, say, oh, no, you can't put a fence around me. Oh, you can't create a boundary around me. But what I can do is I can create a decision-making framework. So if I create a decision-making framework and I'm faced with a choice, my decision-making framework will make the choice for me. So let's say, for instance, it's got something to do with horse racing or gambling. It's out. I'm not going to have anything to do with it because it's related to something I disagree with. So each choice becomes much easier because I have that framework in place. So if you can distill that huge map into an overall framework and say, does this fit within the framework? I think you might find it easier to distill your content into sort of a manageable thing. So for instance, could it just be to do with the strategy of a business? Could it be to do with a specific tactic of finance of a business? Or could it be something to do with the people of a business? And then just focus on one of those elements.
Yeah. No, I mean, so that I have that. It's just turned into a bit of a fractal, right? So it's actually quite simplistic. There's only really five pieces to it.
Yeah.
It's just that the 5 have broken into 20 into it's like a huge thing. So now there's 200, but they're sorted into just 5.
Yeah.
So there's only 5 really. Okay, there's only one idea. There's only one. It's just the first one broke into 5. That's really what happened.
Yeah. So
all the links are there, all the relationships are there, the main core ideas are there. It just gets so big that sometimes I feel a little bit overwhelmed by it. And then that's why I was thinking about the idea of just taking one of the small little sections of the 200 and then being like, okay, let me make a little book off of that and then try that. And then, slowly build out the rest of it. But yeah, the entire idea is there. It's there. It's structured. There's just one. So yeah. Okay, so I think that might be what I'll do. And then there might, and then so the online, and then okay, so the other part was, you mentioned the similarities between website and book publishing, that everything is publishing. What do you mean by everything is publishing?
Well, it's something that people can view, and watch or read or whatever. So an audio book is publishing, a video is publishing, all of it is publishing. So if you think about a newspaper and whether it sells or not, what does a newspaper rely on? The headline, the journalists, the reputation of whatever it is. And it has to be interesting to that audience. Otherwise, it won't sell newspapers. So, my website will not be visited if people don't stay there for a reasonable length of time and look at multiple pages and share it with their friends and interact with me on social media. Like I won't get the visits if I don't keep up the interest in what I'm writing. So when you publish a book, I know a woman who decided to write her life story down, a biography, 300,000 words. Like, who the hell wants to read 300,000 words about another human? I don't know anybody who wants to read 300,000 words about another human. And she gave it to a book club and they said it was boring and it wasn't interesting. But, you know, this was this woman's life story and she was terribly attached to it. And so I think you have to say to yourself, if I just condense this down into the most relevant points, what do I really need to share? Like, I've got all this information. Like, it's when you're given a textbook for university studies, you don't reproduce the whole textbook in the examination. You only produce the bits they test you on. So, yeah, I think of it more as that distillation process is probably key. And you can definitely do more than one. You know, it's not one be all end all and life's all over and, you know, that's it. It's kind of, well, yeah, you try this and it worked or it didn't work, and then you try another one tomorrow. And if some disaster occurs, there's a theory I use in social media training. You only have to wait 19 hours because then you'll be out of the news cycle and they'll be onto something else. So even if I published The Woman in Blue and it was a raging success, by tomorrow there'll be some other story on the news and nobody cares about it. And the other interesting thing with The Woman in Blue is I was on about day 3 when I realised what the ending would be. So everything led to the ending, but I got the ending not on day 1, I got it on day 3. Not at the end, I got it on day 3. So, yeah, and maybe that's, how often do you allow yourself to not think, to just sit and allow your subconscious to come out with the conclusion? So Dave's point about putting it all down and then leaving it and coming back to it, your conscious mind can only operate at, let's say, 10%. I don't know what the numbers are, but let's say your subconscious mind can operate at 10% at maximum capacity. Your subconscious can do like 90%. Like, it's a huge, the difference between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. So if you allow, not us to figure it out, because you know all the stuff, if you allow your subconscious mind to work it out, you might find the answer. Because, yeah, we all know the answer.
So then I guess just the last reiterating point on ghostwriters, editors, and vanity publishers. Better to, well, let me ask, how would you best summarize the 2 points of advice to deal with all of that? How to contend with that part of the process?
Well, you've got to look for what's their game. Like, are they representing you or are they representing themselves? That's the simplest way to assess any piece of advice. You know, what's their agenda? Do they have an agenda, or are they representing you? Like, if I pay you in to advise me, I'm paying you in to advise me, not the publisher, not the reader. I'm paying him to advise me. So I'm very happy with that arrangement. But if I went to Dave and said, should I do an audio book? What's Dave going to say? Yes. And no criticism, because I agree, I should do an audio book. But, you know, it's different advice. So yeah, just always look for that authenticity, I suppose.
You can always, the term I have for that, your description, Sue, is putting the vampire in charge of the blood bank.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Without fail, and it happened to me just this week. I'm looking for a new rental property at the moment, and my daughter and I have applied together, and we were accepted as tenants. So wow, you know, the landlord's happy to get money, you know, from us for rent. The first thing that the agents did is said, we understand you want to move in a month. We want you to pay a month's rent in advance. So this is now, we're paid up 2 months, and we want you to pay the bond. And don't you worry about anything, guys. We'll send you the lease agreement along shortly. Anybody who asks you for money up front has got to be treated with suspicion. And I even include that in my business dealings. I charge half up front for the audio book, and I charge half on publication, because I figure maybe, you know, there's a confidence in you know, splitting the risk there, so that, you know, like, I've got to eat while I'm doing the editing, but I understand that the publisher doesn't want to pay me until he knows that he or she's going, you know, that I'm going to finish the whole process. So anybody who talks about large upfront costs is a problem, I think. They really are. Anybody who's saying, look, just 80% and you'll get a 50% discount for paying 80% up front. If they want cash up front, then that's got to be the biggest red flag. I don't know. So have you had encounters along those lines? I mean, that's probably a real bottom of the barrel example, but
yeah,
there are publishers like that.
I'm an ex-banker, so basically I don't trust anyone. So sadly, I mean, I treat everybody nicely, but I'm waiting for the moment kind of thing, like prove I can trust you before I trust you. I mean, I'll always be polite and all that, but I basically don't assume it's safe. Now, what I will say is free advice is just free advice. So, if you do find someone who's legitimate, pay them for their advice. Like, you shouldn't expect that advice for free either. And that's why I was more than happy to pay for Ewan. And when I said, look, for the 4th book, I'm thinking about going to a traditional publisher, he came to the meeting with printouts of the publishers I could approach. Now, that to me is good service. So I'd rather just pay people per the hour until I'm happy with what they do. And if it continues to be good, I keep paying them by the hour. I don't care if I pay a premium, but I don't want to be signed up for some long-winded process, because like the other day, I was going to pay for LearnDash so I can put the online course on my website. I thought, you know what, maybe I should wait till I've recorded a few videos first. And of course, a week has passed. I've not recorded one video, and that would have been a week of my subscription down the toilet because, the course is not published. So yeah, I only pay for things when I got this piece of advice. I was giving birth to my daughter. Well, I'd given birth to my daughter, I should say. I was in the hospital and I was next to a woman who was having her 4th baby. And I said, what's the best piece of advice you can give me? Because you've got 4 kids and, I'm on the first one. She says, don't buy anything until you absolutely need it. And I kid you not, that's one of the best pieces of advice I have ever received in my life, because kids grow at ridiculous rates and you buy thinking it'll be for summer and then they're grown out of it. And, but if you wait, sometimes people will just give you kids' clothes and then you don't have to buy any. So, it was the best piece of advice. But if I ever want professional advice or professional support, I will always do my due diligence and then I will pay for it. Always. And there on the day, if possible. Melita asked a question, what's the quickest time frame to allow to write your book? Well, it depends on your time, your typing speed, how many words, there's lots of factors. But you also need to have that focus, and getting into that zone is different for different people. So yeah, it's a bit like how long's a piece of string, that question. I'm really conscious of the time. I'm due on another webinar in 27 minutes, and I'm supposed to have statistics ready because I'm going to be interviewed for a podcast for the University of Western Australia. So God help me, I've got to find something fast. But Daniel, thank you for your questions. They've really made me rethink a lot of things that I do or why I did them, which has been an interesting thing. Twice as long for the middle to the end. Thanks, Cameron. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for those who've stayed right to the end. Destination for Cull Detail. Think of a podcast. It's where people want to take the deeper dive and hear the backstory. Yeah, thanks, Cameron.
Just that.
Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, Sue. That was from me. So just for Daniel, that where you're groaning a little bit with your elephant-sized project, if you're thinking about helping it lose some weight, then people have a huge fear of missing out and also want to hear the backstory. So any of that detail where you sort of feel, oh, can I just leave that as a cliffhanger? Then that's your podcast series Beyond the Book, Daniel, and that's where your book start. And I'm sure Sue will verify this, that it starts growing legs.
Yeah,
and
I keep learning new stuff all the time because I go to between 1 and 4 events myself every week. So, I always get more ideas. And then what I've realized now is if I don't get them out fast, I'm scared I'm going to lose them. So yesterday I didn't really have time. I was supposed to be preparing for my earlier presentation. I thought, I've got this idea on ways to find warm leads on LinkedIn. I'm writing the article now, and off I went, and it was fast. And so that's what does tend to happen is once you get into that writing zone, you get a lot quicker at it and you put out, a lot more. Melita's realised she's already got enough content for 3 books. Woohoo! Send us the titles. So thank you, Dave. I really appreciated you putting your hand up to come and, represent yourself and because you've worked with so many authors and you've obviously gleaned lots of tips and tricks, not only from hearing their stories and editing them, but also, just doing the audiobook process, I guess.
Oh, thanks, Sue. It's been too long since I've seen you. And Daniel, very nice to meet you. And thank you for your beautiful open questions. You're one of the most open-minded folks that I've discussed with, and it's great to be talking to people who are thinking at these, all of this thinking you're doing at the moment. It's going to do nothing but inform a greater process down the track, I would suggest. I hear there's a lot of authors regret, particularly when they have to read out their own book as an audio book, and there's a whole new edit after they're finished doing that. Oh my God, that sentence was like 2 paragraphs long, Dave, and I've gone, I know. You put more full stops and more commas and short sentences and littler words, so it's great to hear. But very best of luck with your project, and thank you so much for the invitation, Sue.
You're welcome.
Hope to see you all again soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. And yes, I put my recruiter's hat on, and I could tell Daniel was quality just in the briefest of exchanges we had. So bravo, Daniel, for agreeing to this, because it is a bit out there, and we've put you on the spot a little as well. So
it's a lot of fun. Had a great time.
Totally agree. I'd love to do it again.
Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. You have a great day. Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.